What is going on, gunfighters? Gonna redo a classic here. I know Troy, one of the longtime patrons, really likes this content. I'm a special shout out. But it's been a while since we've done best defensive 9mm loads. And hopefully, by God's grace, I've gotten better at podcasting. So let's drop the hammer on this topic again. Little bit of a different take. I'm going to go through some of the top defensive 9mm loads, some of the strengths and weaknesses of each, why you should care what I have to say about defense or 9mm or tactics or any of that stuff is why I put in the bio. So I will put in a rapid fire version if this is the first time you've come across Gunfighter Life, and then we'll get into the main topic, defensive 9mm loads in the year of our Lord, 2025.
Blessed to have served in the military, law enforcement, combat veteran, private contractor, competition shooter, lifelong hunter, guide. Blessed by God that He got me through all those things so I could share this firsthand training, knowledge, experience with you to serve you today. Let's dive into the podcast.
9mm, the defensive handgun caliber of our time. You can like it or hate it. It is. It is. This is not the episode to debate why it is. This is to talk about the best defensive 9mm loads commonly available on the market. Let's dive right in, cannonball into this episode. Number one, the gold standard, the Speer Gold Dot. I have some on my hip right now. The Speer Gold Dot is the gold standard. I guess pun intended, but it is. It's like what all other ones are kind of measured against. What are the strengths of the Speer Gold Dot? It is street proven and then some. It's been around a while. It's street proven. It's got really good credibility. It's been used by a lot of agencies, a lot of departments, a lot of civilians, a lot of feds. It is very proven. Some of the strengths is that. That's the big one. It's street proven. Also, they do a lot of R&D because they get big contracts and they're a big company. They do a lot of R&D on, is it out of like duty-sized handguns? Is it going to penetrate enough? Is it going to not overexpand, not underexpand, penetrate to that Goldilocks zone of 12 to 16 inches in ballistics gel in most circumstances? That's a big strength of it. Another really big strength is that it comes in most of the common grain weights. It comes in a lot of times standard velocity and plus P velocity. So you can get a 115, a 124, a 147. Get some of those variants in a plus P if you want it. That's a big strength of this cartridge. Another big one is they're pretty readily available. You may not see them at every mom and pop gas station gun store, but they're pretty available. They do a good job of not just supplying to law enforcement, but also supplying to civilians. So that's a strength of theirs. Some weaknesses, they're not cheap. And if you consider this a weakness, they have a really, in general, a really big chasm of a hollow point. They have a really big wide open hollow point. You might think that's great. It is great if your gun will feed them. Some guns are more finicky than others about feeding hollow points. Some guns that were designed quite a while ago before hollow points were prevalent may not feed them as well. So you do your own R&D. Don't go shoot a bunch of, whatever the cheapest steel case garbage round nose ammo you can get and then assume that your gun is going to feed hollow points, especially not really big hollow points. So you do have a pretty big hollow point. That could be a disadvantage if your gun doesn't feed those. I should mention they also make short-barreled load, at least one that I'm aware of. So if you're shooting a little baby #MeToo carry gun, check the box, barrel shorter than 4 inches, they make a short-barreled load. because most of these premium defensive loads we're going to talk about were designed for duty-sized handguns, like a man-sized handgun. But if you carry a baby-sized handgun in 9mm, they make a load for that too. So that's also a plus. The biggest plus for me is it's easy to get a matched load in practice ammunition. One of my go-to practice ammunitions in 9mm is Speer Lawman. Speer Lawman is the lawman, to enunciate it, lawman is the training equivalent of their hollow point, so their defensive ammunition. So if your gun, I've preached a long time about don't shoot a bunch of cheap range ammo and then load your gun up with a completely different defensive ammo, different grain weight, different velocity, different powder, different primer, and expect it to shoot in the same place. That would be a mathematical anomaly, and you're trusting your life for somebody else's life to something not proven. Speer makes their matched ammo in the Lawman so you can shoot and practice with a bullet that shoots same point of aim, point of impact, same kind of bullet geometry, dimensions roughly, and all that stuff. So if you shoot a 147 Speer Gold Dot, you can shoot a 147 Lawman. You shoot a 124 Gold Dot, you can shoot a 124 Lawman. You get it. That's a giant advantage to me. That's why I'm starting off with that load. I think it has the most advantages. They also, I'm going to throw this in now, although it's kind of a next generation hollow point, they make the Speer G2. G2 stands for Gold Dot 2, but the G2. It has a polymer, elastomer, rubber, whatever they call it, pre-clogged hollow point. Without getting too deep into that, it's kind of like their next iteration. Not that there's anything wrong with the old ones. They only, I think, come in 147s. But I also really like those. I have used those doing actual stuff. They are a good load, the G2, and the older 147s. I like the heavier, in general, bullets. In general, there are times when you might want something else, but Speer gives you a big menagerie of bullet loadings. The next one I'm going to talk about, Remington. The Remington Golden Saber. These have been around a long time. What made me think of these and talk about these next is the fact that I mentioned that the Speer Gold Dot has a really big, wide hollow point. Well, the Remington Golden Saber does not. It has a pretty small hollow point, and it still should give you some pretty good expansion, but it does it with a smaller hollow point. So, going to the big advantage of this bullet, small hollow point, which means it should feed, if you have a gun that's finicky feeding hollow points, you may take a glance, take a gander at the other gold, the Remington Golden Saber. They also make the black belt, which is kind of a different material belt around the bullet to control expansion. Not all the Golden Sabers are the black belt. You should see black belt on there if they make it, or if that load is the black belt. Their newer generations are bonded. Some of the older generations may not be bonded. You may decide that matters for you or it doesn't matter for you. I see listed a 124 plus P and a 147 in their bonded. I'm not going to go through all their loads. I also see a black belt load for the 124 plus P. Some of the downsides to this ammo, it is less prevalent, especially than the Speer Gold Dot. It does have some decent law enforcement use. Also, it's not as readily available. I don't think they do as good a job marketing to civilians, but it is available. It's not like you can't get it. It's not as available in as many different configurations or many different grain weights. Like most of the other loads we're going to talk about, you're going to have to probably find a matched load for training ammo. I should also mention that Remington got bifurcated. It got split into at least two different things, maybe more, but the two big ones, the gun part of Remington when it went bankrupt and the ammunition part of Remington when it went bankrupt. Sadly, the gun part of Remington has had some issues getting back on its feet, let's say, to be polite. The ammunition company is snapping necks and cashing checks. It is doing real good. Some of the new Remington ammo is some of the best ammo I think on the market, and I have no reason to believe that Golden Saber has suffered any real bad ramifications from the bankruptcy and it getting bought up to another company. Like the gun company, again, they kind of split. So even though they're both called Remington, they're owned by different people, run differently. And the ammunition company, the new Remington ammunition, in my experience, has been nothing but good since that bifurcation. So I just wanted to toss that out there. Okay, one of my personal favorites is the Winchester Ranger and the Winchester Ranger T. These are the Winchester Ranger T, for all intents and purposes. Let's call it what it is, the black Talon without the black coating. And I don't know how much of that black coating was marketing, but they're a really good, vicious hollow point. I like them in 147s. They come in other things. I believe they come in a 127 plus P plus if you want to just scream in high velocity bullet. I think bonus, some of the big advantages of the Winchester are they are some of the best terminal performers. I'm just going to say that. Like round per round, they're some of the best. The Winchester Ranger T's, some of the best terminal performers. Like they make some of the nastiest expanded bullets. They do well. Also, they're a truncated cone design. I like that design. I like a truncated cone design better than a rounded nose bullet. There are a lot of different reasons for that. One of the big ones germane to this is I don't care how good the hollow point is. I don't care how much engineering went into it. There are situations where even the best hollow point will not expand. If the bullet fails to expand at all, which can happen. It's not common today with such good technology, but it does happen. And hopefully you're preparing for a worst case scenario. If the bullet does not expand, I think, and there's some pretty good evidence, some data to back it up, that a truncated cone bullet design does better than a round nose bullet design. So that's a big benefit to me. It's a big benefit for the Winchester Ranger. These also have pretty decent law enforcement distribution. Not as good on the civilian side. I think they have some other lines that they market to civilians. I'm not going to advocate those here because I don't really have any experience with them. But if I'm going to get, like, let's say a Winchester hollow point, I want like the best if my life or your life depends on it. And I think the best they have to offer is the Ranger and Ranger T. They do make the 147s. That's my preferred Winchester Ranger T 147. They can be hard to find. So hard to find that I recently, when I went to repurchase good defensive ammo, I looked and looked and looked. And I couldn't find any what I thought were good Winchester Ranger Ts at the time. So I ended up getting Spear Gold Dot 147s, which is fine. But that's one of the big downsides. They can be hard to find. But they are a good option if you can get them. Let's talk about a really good one from Hornady, and that is the Hornady Critical Duty. 135 plus P. It's really good in terminal performance. What are its strengths? It's like one of the most proven, I would call, latest generation of defensive hollow points. It's got a pre-clogged tip with that rubber elastic kind of thing we've already kind of mentioned, which means it's less likely to get clogged with drywall and things like that. So they use the term barrier blind, right? That's like a marketing term. I'm going to anthropomorphize a bullet here and say that it's kind of wise and that it will tend to go through things that you don't want it to expand in, but then still expand in things you want it to expand in. It's got that going for it. That's a big strength. It's also a bonded bullet. Again, it's got all the latest and greatest as far as I'm aware. Nickel plating, low flash powders. It's a bonded bullet. It's a truncated cone, which I like. It uses a harder lead. I don't know if they use antimony or linotite. They use something harder in the lead portion than just regular lead. It's one of the best barrier penetrating rounds out there. I'm gonna go ahead and say that it's one of the best barrier penetrating rounds. It's got a lot going for it. Some of the biggest upsides, in my opinion, also some of the biggest downsides. What could be the downsides? Well, one is 135 grain plus P. Remember how I talked about one of my big things is training with ammo. that is going to shoot the same point of aim, point of impact, bullet profile, feed the same, all that stuff. Where are you going to find affordable 135 grain plus P training ammo? You're probably hand loading that. I'm not a big fan of carrying hand loaded ammo for defense. I should do a whole podcast on that because when I did one for Patreon, it blew up. But putting that on the table, you might be able to find 135 grain similar bullet profile plus P loading to practice with, but it's not going to be easy. One of the 135 grain bullets, they're more popular than they used to be in 9mm, but they're not popular. They're not popular at all. So finding a training ammo for it is going to be tough. And if you're doing a lot of training, which you should be if you're carrying a handgun on your hip to possibly use in a real-life defensive scenario, you should be training. And unless you just have so much money, you can just buy cases and cases of the actual duty ammo of 135 grain plus P. If you're a department or a private security contractor and you've got Uncle Sam footing the bill for your ammo, that's one thing. If you're buying it, you might be hard-pressed to find a good training round match for that bullet. But again, really good for performance and barrier blind, like going through barriers. Now, they do make the critical duty and the critical defense. The critical defense is geared more towards the civilian side of things. They also make the American Gunner, which is their even more affordable, I think, civilian CCW stuff. Do your own research on that. I don't have a lot of first-hand experience because if I'm looking for something like that, I'm probably going to go with the higher-end stuff. I'm pretty cheap by default, but when it comes to defensive ammo to protect somebody's life with, I want something street-proven, which means mass use by big organizations so that I'm not the beta tester in the gunfight. So you do your own research on those other lines that they make. Now let's talk about Federal HST, one of the other big boys on the block. Federal HST, as far as big contracts go, it's probably just behind Spear Gold. I don't have numbers. I'm just from all the years I have in law enforcement and private security contracting and things like that. It's probably second behind that. The Federal HST. Now, ironically, I like the HST. It's some of my favorite terminal performance in other calibers that I don't like as much as 9mm, like 40 and 45. And those I generally tend to go to an HST. I generally don't in the 9mm. If you just look at the numbers, if you just look at a bunch of testing in those, they do good. But I think there are better terminal performance options. And I think that's one of the big downsides. You could argue with that if you want. I'm not saying it's bad. I'm just saying there's better. If I'm looking at typical performance parameters and I look at the HST, I tend to gravitate more towards either the Spear Gold Dot or the Winchester Ranger. But again, there's nothing wrong with an HST. An HST, I think, stands for Hydroshock 2. If you are old enough to remember the old Hydroshocks with the kind of lead pillar in the middle, that was an early attempt to prevent clogging. The old Hydroshocks, they were okay for a really early generation bullet. You don't see them a lot around anymore. The HSTs, they're good. Some of the good advantages of them, again, they're pretty available since they have pretty wide use. I do see that they make a 124 grain, 124 grain plus P, and 147 grain. One of the really cool things that they do is they make like a matched box. You get a box of 100. And remember how I talked about how you had the Spear Lawman and the Spear Gold Dot? Well, they have a similar thing where they sell it in one box. So they're like taking it to the next level. Some training ammo in the box, some defensive ammo in the box. I like that. I like that a lot. Also, I assume they sell both those separate. I know they sell the HST separately, but they probably sell the training equivalent. Again, I'm a big fan of the 147s, but they probably sell that exact load. You can probably buy it by the case, so you can practice with your practice ammo by the case and then use your HSTs for duty or for carry. Another big strength, they are a bonded bullet. Their petals, when they peel back, tend to be pretty sharp. maybe second only to the Winchester Ranger T in that regard. Again, they're a good ammo. Again, the real drawback for me, and it's kind of a big one, is they don't tend to perform as well, especially since I like the 147s. I don't think they do perform as well as some of the other 147 options, like the Spear Gold Dot or Gold Dot G2 or Winchester Ranger Ts. But they're right behind there, and they're really good. Oh, and one of the big advantages I should throw in there, Federal has some of the softest primers. Why might that matter? Well, it might matter if your gun is kind of finicky on hammer strength or striker strength. If you've done any kind of trigger modifications to like a Glock or something because the Glock trigger pull is horrible, I get it. But a lot of those, not just the Glock, but the Glock's a common one, a lot of that can result in less force, less newtons going to impact that primer. There's a reason the vast majority of competition shooters that are any good, that win a lot of competitions, that reload that I'm aware of, use Federal primers. Federal primers are softer. They're some of the best primers in my opinion. And I can't imagine that Federal HST is loaded with anything other than a Federal primer. So if your gun is at all finicky like that, you've done any kind of trigger work to your gun, or you just know you and you don't clean your gun very often, you don't completely disassemble that slide and clean out the firing pin channel, if you're in a really cold environment where that might be impeded by really cold weather, like the force of your striker or your hammer or whatever. Anyway, Federal has the softest primers, so you may really look at that as a big advantage if it applies to you. On Federal, there are some much older loads. I was using these back in the aughts, and they were old then, but they're really good and really street proven. They are the Federal, they're not giant marketing. They're not the latest and greatest technology, but they work, and they still work, and they have a really good track record. I think the track record is more important than the latest and greatest marketing. I'm going to throw those in here as a really good option, even though they're older. That's the Federal 9BP and the Federal 9BP LE. One is a regular standard velocity, no frills, good street cred hollow point, and they're very, very affordable. I just saw some boxes of 50 for under $20. They're not like a lot of the hollow points that weren't actually designed to expand, that are like hollow points in name only to make you feel good because it says hollow points. These are actually designed for use, like duty use. The Federal 9BP. I don't know what it stands for. It's been around a long, long time. I've used them a long time. I don't use them much anymore because they're, I believe, only in the 115 grain. And I don't tend to like lighter, faster bullets. But if you do, the Federal 9BP is an affordable, effective option. Generally, you get them in 50 round boxes. And if you are just like, you're like a Weatherby guy in rifles and you're a screaming high velocity in handguns kind of guy, the Federal 9BP LE is a 9mm 115 grain plus P plus. Years ago when I was shooting a lot of these, because government was paying the bill, I was actually a little concerned about how my handgun would hold up. So I wrote Federal and said, hey, what's the PSI on these things, and are they safe or whatever? And I'm not, because I don't remember exactly what the pressure was on the plus P plus rounds, because it's outside of SAMI spec. Where the SAMI spec, plus P is even a SAMI spec, so you can look up what the max pressure should be. There's no SAMI spec as far as I'm aware for a plus P plus. They're just like, let's just cram a bunch of powder in there and shove that bullet super fast. I wrote to them, and it was quite a substantial increase from regular ammunition. Big disadvantage to the 9BP LE, the LE is the plus P plus one, is you had better make sure your handgun can stand up to a lot of abuse. If you have an older gun, a gun not designed for this, like I wouldn't run these in an old Browning high power or some cheap Turkish clone or something. But if you've got and I'm not going to tell you it's safe, you should probably, if you're not sure that you're going to safe to shoot plus P plus, you probably shouldn't. But if it is, there's a lot of horsepower in that cartridge, and they're affordable. And they're kind of a hidden gem Looking for really powerful, affordable 9mm defensive ammunition, and you want screaming fast. Now again, it's plus P plus, so you would better know what you're doing, especially, but you'd probably have to reload if you were going to get a matched training equivalent. Or they're actually not that expensive if you buy them by the case. You know, it's not as expensive as buying a case of some of the other ammunition. So you could go that route. But the Federal 9BP is their standard velocity. The 9BP LE is a plus P plus. They've been around for, again, they were old when I was using them in the aughts. And they still make them for a reason, right? They are street proven. They have some street cred behind them. More than enough to make up for their lack of frills in marketing, I think. Now, keep in mind some afterthoughts for this. I'm generally thinking of carrying a man-sized real fighting handgun. I would probably give far different advice if I was talking about a little baby, you know, cut in half gun with a half-sized barrel. I would consider a full-size barrel somewhere around 5 inches. I could get by with 4, but anything shorter than that, I would consider that not a fighting handgun. It's not a fighting handgun. I'll just put it that way. I don't care how much you think that it is or how much you think a little 2-inch barrel is. It's just not. If I was looking for little baby pocket gun 9mm loads, 1, I might tell you to look at a different caliber, or 2, I might give you completely different advice. Likewise, if I was talking about a PCC, because you're dealing with much higher velocities. Most of these premium 9mm defensive loads are loaded for a full-size duty handgun. Because they assume I think you're going to be a man and shoot a full-size handgun. I reinforce that because I care about you guys, and I want you to use a good tool for the job, not one that makes you feel good, or not one that's trendy. Going back to the PCC, if you're driving them at crazy high velocities, much more than these were intended for, you might get overexpansion. The more a bullet expands, the less it's going to penetrate because it has more surface area. That's something also to consider. Also, notice I didn't mention any of these new whiz bang all the time. You think it's something new that they come out with a super lightweight bullet at a screaming fast velocity. I'm not talking about 115 grain light. I'm talking about like lighter than that. We've got this new Matrix XYZ acronym bullet. It's like a ninja blender bomb going off in the chest cavity. I didn't mention any of those loads for a very good reason. Just say no to that stuff. They've been trying to do that since the Glazer safety slug. That's nothing new. Just stay away from those. Get something that's proven. And all the loads that I mentioned, aforementioned, they're proven. So if you get the big part of this, if you get any of those and run it in a fighting handgun and train with it and you can get hits with it, I'm confident that they will serve you well. Any handgun, I don't care if it's 940 or the mighty 45 or 357, handguns are not super effective at stopping. They're just not. You have them because that's what you can have on you all the time. Something like 80% of handgun wounds are not fatal. You should expect to have to get fast, accurate, first, second, third, maybe 4, 5, 6 rounds on target. Sometimes more than that, but the vast majority getting fast hits, fast first round hits and fast follow-up shots. That's important. No hollow point is so good that you don't have to worry about that. No hollow point is so good that you can just be a bad shot and just hit them anywhere and they're just going to fall over. I don't care if you got a 45 plus P plus P plus P plus. It doesn't work that way. You got to get the bullet in the right place, and sometimes you got to get fast, multiple hits in the right place. Train with your kit. Train with your gun with whatever of these loads you decide. That's what's important. Get professional training. Your Uncle Jim's barber's cousin's transgender buddy's dad, who was a Navy SEAL, who said this is the best thing and this is the best gun and this is the best load and you just got to carry it. That doesn't count. Get actual training from an actual person. If you just want marksmanship training, you can get somebody that's a good marksman. If you want defensive combat style training, get training from somebody that's been there and done that. We just got through a 20-year war the GWAT. And I I was there. I'm not saying that I agree with a bunch of stuff that we did, but just like we've gleaned a lot from the medical side, like really good tourniquets and trauma medicine, there were some really hard-won lessons in that. And part of that was we got a really good. I'm having a hard time articulating this. We have a lot of guys with a lot of really good training and experience. Not just because somebody was in the military doesn't mean they have good combat experience. They serve their country just the same as everybody else, but a helicopter mechanic does not make them good at ballistics and make them good at handgun training. Get somebody that has relevant experience and get actual training. You don't know what you don't know. And training classes are not to make you an awesome shooter in a weekend. Training classes are to show you what you need to work on. That's some big overarching things that are more important than a particular hollow point that you choose. All right, I'm going to get down off the soapbox there and say, guys, I harp on that kind of stuff because I care. With that, your tactical verse of the day. It applies to what we were just talking about. The horse is made ready for the day of battle, but victory rests with the Lord. Thanks for listening. Keep your Bibles open and your powder dry, and have a blessed day.